So yes, I do think media ownership transparency is a very important issue because it does provide the public the information about who is manipulating the message, who is behind the message we get from a media organization. So we did see the example of Georgia, for example, where a law on media ownership transparency changed the dynamic completely in terms of how people consumed the media. We in Moldova have a draft law on media ownership transparency, but because of political instability, it's being dragged through the process of being adopted. There is quite a process in Ukraine, for example, in terms of having such a law, and it's in the process of voting in the parliament there. So I think it's a good example, again, when you want and when you have political will, it's possible to do. And I think it's also important to have several preconditions for media owners. That is regulation of ownership from abroad and specifically from offshore companies, and ownership by active political members of parliament or government members. That is something that has to be thought through, because these people have political power and suddenly they also have media power, and that is definitely to take into account when such regulations are adopted and included. I think it's important to include those in new legislation regarding that. We can look at recommendations provided by European organizations, because there are examples of how to do a proper media law covering media ownership issues. So I definitely am an advocate in terms of working on that. In Moldova, we started to work on this issue a while ago, or several years ago. We invited experts from countries with experience in the field. We worked ourselves. We had quite a good cooperation from the parliament itself, from the Media Commission, or the commission dealing with media issues. But again, with time, we saw less and less interest and less willingness to go through the process entirely. The important issue, yes, was the disclosure of the final beneficiary, because in many countries we have access to information laws that allows us actually to see who is the owner, and sometimes it can be somebody that has, for example, a pensioner with no money and no idea what he owns or she owns. So what that piece of legislation also presupposes is to have and to disclose the final beneficiary of that media organization. And if such information is not becoming public or is not provided to the state, then there are penalties, serious penalties associated with that. Anyone should have access to the actual list of media organizations and their owners, be it state, private, public, any type of ownership, with not only owner again, but also the final beneficiary. Well, we had our last government just fell after 2 months in place, so in terms of Moldova, I'm quite skeptical. I'm more optimistic about Ukraine, and I'm following the process there because I used to work there. So I think some countries are moving faster, and probably that's worth looking in general in Europe, how things are in terms of media ownership laws and regulations. And in some countries they are not even needed, such laws, because that information is already public and is part of business transparency issues. In other countries, media should have a special focus and special light on it. Sure, I think we can provide, and we have the documents in English, because when we asked for experience from other countries, we actually needed English laws and regulations, so we can share that easily.